All right, so this injector is installed, so that's good. So now let's go back to the other side. This is injector number 4 that we put on the first cylinder. We're gonna torque this now. Same torque spec, 79 inch-pound, just like that. All right. All right, so that's tight. So now we're gonna reconnect our fuel return line. Oh, we should have run the fuel return line first. Okay, I guess we gotta remove this now. We gotta undo this again. All right, so that's good. So now we're gonna reconnect our fuel return line, just like that. And then we're gonna connect our electrical connector, so we're good to go. Let's see if our misfire is going to follow the injector. I'm not gonna close the air filter box because if our problem is the injector, we're gonna have to remove this again. So I'm just gonna leave it like this. Okay, so remember we got injector number 1 and put it on cylinder 4, and then we got the injector from cylinder 4 and put it on cylinder number 1. So now I'm gonna go in the vehicle and start the engine and see if my misfire is gonna follow the injector, and then if it does, that will tell me that the issue is the injector. Okay, so now I'm gonna go in the vehicle and start the engine. We're gonna start the engine. So as you can hear, the engine is running. So now let's go back under the hood and see what we got. Actually, right now, the engine sounds good. It's not misfiring. But one thing I have noticed is I hear a compression leak on this cylinder over here. I hope you can hear this. There's a compression leak on this 4th cylinder. It looks like the injector copper washer on this cylinder is leaking. I don't know if I can put this piece of paper here. You see how it's getting pushed? We have a compression leak on this cylinder. Now I'm gonna put this over here You see how quiet it is over here? Look at this area. This piece of paper is not moving. It's not being blown up. Okay? Now let's bring it over here. Now look at the difference. I don't know if the camera is picking up the noise. Listen to this. You see that? That's a compression leak right there. You see that? So this injector here is leaking compression. Okay? So now what I'm gonna do is, since we have a compression leak on this injector, I am gonna get 2 injector compressor washers. There are 2 small copper washers. I'm gonna replace them and see what happens. And this explains why the injector that came out of this cylinder was really dark. Okay? It was really dark because we have compression gases leaking past the injector tube. So I'm gonna get injector seals, and then we're gonna see if that's gonna fix our compression leak. Because the compression leak over here will definitely cause a misfire. Okay? As you can see right now, the engine runs great. It's no longer misfiring. I'm gonna bring up our scan tool so we can scan the engine computer. Let's see if our misfire code is coming back. So here's our scan tool. Let's scan the engine computer. Let's go to codes. As you can see, there are no codes present. Actually, the engine sounds a lot better now. Let's go to codes. No codes present. So this is odd. Now, I don't know if because we don't have our IDs written in the engine computer, I don't think that can make a difference. Actually, I am gonna go in the vehicle and turn off the engine. Let's write our injector IDs in the engine computer and see what happens. So the engine is off. We're gonna keep the key on. I can hear a compression leak at this injector. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna write these injector IDs in the engine computer. So let's back out. Let's go to functional test, special functions, injector coding. Let's start with cylinder 1. So our number for cylinder 1 over here is 811K6IF. Let's see if we have the same one in the engine computer. So 811K6IF. So that's good. Now, since we took cylinder 4 and put it in cylinder 1 and cylinder 1 in cylinder 4, so we have to switch these numbers. So let's start with cylinder 1. Cylinder 1 is going to be cylinder 4 now. I mean the ID number from cylinder 4. So we're going to grab cylinder 4, 8IH, WB, WG. Okay. Program. Okay, and if you see over here on cylinder number 4, we have the same number here. Okay, so now we're gonna write the ID of cylinder number 4. So now we're gonna put the number 1 ID there. So it was 811K6IF. Okay. Program. So we're good. Okay, so cylinder number 1, which is injector 4 now, has the ID written in the engine computer, and so does cylinder 4. So we're good to go. Okay. So now let's start the engine and see what happens. So the engine is running. It sounds pretty okay. Besides the compression leak that we have, but actually right now the engine is starting to misfire. So after writing the injector ID in the engine computer, the engine is shaking. I don't know if you can tell. The engine is shaking right now. So let's bring up our scan tool here. Let's scan the engine computer. Let's see if our misfire code came back. Oh, right there. Haha. Our misfire has followed the injector. Now cylinder number 1 is misfiring. Bingo. We found the issue. Right now the engine is shaking like crazy. Now, let me bring up our scan tool again. So although we have a compression issue here, we have a little compression leak, we will fix this by replacing the injector crash seal, the crash washer, but our injector is bad also because we got the injector out of cylinder 4, we put it on cylinder 1, we got the one from cylinder 1, put it on cylinder 4, our misfire followed the injector. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do now. I'm sorry for the glare, guys. Let's back out. Let's erase the code. Oh yeah, now the whole thing is shaking like crazy. Let's read the code again. So no codes present. I'm gonna go in the vehicle and rev up the engine. Let's rev up the engine and see if our code is gonna come back. So let's back out. Let's read the codes again. As you can see, now we have a misfire on cylinder 1. Cylinder 1 contribution / balance, cylinder 1 misfire detected. So this is the code that we had on cylinder number 4 when the 4th injector was on cylinder number 4. We put it on cylinder 1, the misfire followed the injector. So our problem is a bad fuel injector. Okay? So now I'm going to turn off the engine. We now know what the problem is. I'm going to turn off the engine and then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. This injector over here is bad. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to have to buy a new fuel injector from Audi and install it, and after that this will be fixed. We are done with our diagnosis on this vehicle. The problem on this engine was a defective fuel injector. We moved the injectors around. We got the injector from cylinder 1 and put it on cylinder 4, and the one that was misfiring on cylinder 4, we put it on cylinder 1. Our misfire followed the injector. So that tells me that the injector is bad. We have to replace the injector. I'm gonna call the Audi dealership and get a fuel injector and fuel injector copper washers, and then we should be good to go with this. And after the injector gets delivered, I will bring you guys back up so we can repair this vehicle. So I'm gonna do that and then I'll bring you guys back up. I have called the Audi dealership. They told me that they had the injectors in stock. I bought one, they just delivered it, so we're good to go. Here is our fuel injector. This is the part number. So I'm gonna open it so you can see. Here is our brand new fuel injector. And this injector was expensive. This injector is not cheap. So here is our brand new fuel injector. Okay. Now, before we install this fuel injector, what I want to do now is we're going to do a little bit of learning before we install this fuel injector. We know that this is our bad fuel injector because cylinder 1 is now misfiring. Now, we're going to use this injector to learn a little bit about TDI injector waveform analysis. Okay, so what I'm about to do now is not really necessary because we are done with our diagnosis, but we're going to use this to learn a little bit about these injectors. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring out my lab scope. We're going to scope these two wires. We're going to look at our voltage signals on the bad injector, which is this one, and then we're going to compare our voltage waveform to a good injector, which is this one over here. This is 1, 2, 3. So the injector on cylinder 1 is bad, but the injector on cylinder 2 is good. So we're going to compare the voltage waveforms on this bad injector to the voltage waveforms on this good injector to see if there will be a difference. If we use the scope first, where we're going to be able to identify the problem with the scope, so we can compare both waveforms to see if we can find a difference. I'm also going to use an amp clamp to measure the current flow that this injector is drawing, and then we're going to compare it to the non-good injector next to it. Okay, so this step right now is not really necessary. It's just for learning purposes. We're going to scope the bad injector, and then we're going to compare the voltage waveforms and the amperage waveform to a non-good one to see if there will be a difference. Okay, and after that we're going to install our brand new fuel injector. So I'm going to get my lab scope connected, and then I'll bring you guys back up just for learning purposes. Okay, let's see if we're going to see a difference on the voltage waveforms. I got my lab scope test leads connected to the scope. I have my first channel yellow connected to one injector wire, and then I have my second channel green also connected to the injector wire. So we are back probing these two injector wires. We're going to connect our ground to this ground post over here. Okay, and then we're going to use our amp clamp and clamp it around one of the injector wires. So we're going to zero this first. I am on the 20 amp scale, so we're going to be on the 20 amp scale. We're going to zero this, and then we're going to clamp our amp clamp around one injector wire. Okay, so we're going to measure the current flow that the bad injector is drawing, and then we're also going to watch the voltage waveform on both injector wires. So we're going to start with the non-bad fuel injector. So now let's get our lab scope set up. Let's go to scope multimeter. Okay, so I have my first two channels on the voltage scale, and then my third channel on the 10 amp scale. So now I'm going to go in the vehicle and start the engine. So here's what we got. Here is our voltage waveform and amperage waveform. So I'm gonna pause this so we can analyze the data. I'm gonna turn off the engine because this engine is shaking like crazy. I don't wanna run it for too long. So I'm gonna turn off the engine. This waveform doesn't look too bad. I'm not really sure if this is normal or not. Let's bring up our cursors here. Now I'm gonna put our first cursor at the peak of the yellow trace. Okay, so the peak, so the first tracer, the peak voltage, okay, the highest spike over here is 108 volts. Now I'm going to put it at the peak of the amperage draw. Okay, so at the peak of the amperage draw, the first peak over here, we have about 6.6 amps. Okay, I'm looking at the blue trace value over here, so first cursor. And then on the second cursor, so voltage spike maximum is 112.1 volt. And then let's do the amperage peak. The amperage peak over here is 3.4 amps. Okay, if I turn these off, let me turn off the blue trace and the yellow trace. Okay, so it looks like this is our ground. And then if we turn on our yellow trace, let's look at our cursor's value. So peak, the first peak voltage over here is 108, and then the second one is about the same, about 108. Let me see if I can get it up here. So yeah, so first peak, so first peak voltage about 108 volt, and then second peak voltage about 110. And now let's measure the last one, about 111.7. Now let's look at our amperage. First peak, and then second peak. So first peak on the amperage about 6.3 amps. Second peak 2.5. I don't know if I'm really on the peak here. And then last one about 3.8. Okay, 3.8, almost 3.8 as well. So second peak about 4.6, and then last one, I think last one was about 3.8. Okay, 3.4. Anyways, so first peak over here, you know, when the injector first opens, it draws about 6.3 amps. Okay, and then the voltage, it's about 108 or 107. So I'm gonna save this. Audi injector. Audi injector bad, non-bad. Okay, so that's good. So now we're gonna move our test leads to the non-good injector. Okay, so we're gonna backprobe this wire, and then this one over here. We're gonna move our amp clamp right here. Okay, so I'm gonna go in the vehicle and start the engine. We're gonna compare the voltage waveforms that we saw on the bad injector to the voltage waveforms on the good injector next to it. All right, so here's what we got. So this is our data coming from the second injector, which is good. So I'm gonna pause this. I'm gonna turn off the engine so we can analyze the data. So let's analyze our amperage waveform first. So let's bring our cursor on the first amperage draw, first peak over here. So I remember on the old one, the first peak was, I believe, 6.5 or 6 point something. I think it was 6.5 or 6.6. Now, on the first draw, on the non-good injector, we are reading 5.6 amps. So there is a 1 amp difference. So now let's move our second cursor to the second spike. I hope I'm on the highest point here. Okay, so it's about 4.9 amps. So first draw 5.6, second 4.9, and now let's check the last one. Okay, so the last one here is 5.4. Okay, so this last draw 5.4. So the difference, I mean amperage wise, between the bad injector and the good injector is about 1 amp, because on the first spike over here on the bad injector we were drawing about 6.5 amp, but this non-good is drawing 5.6. Okay, now let's look at the voltage pattern. On the voltage here, so voltage first peak is 110, so 110.4. The other one was reading 108, so about a 2 volt difference. So bad one was 108 on this first spike, the non-good is 110. So let's check the second spike here. About 113 volt maximum or peak voltage over here, which was the same to the bad injector. Now let's test the other one. So third peak voltage, okay, about 113 volt, 100.13.7. Okay, so in terms of voltage waveform, they both look the same. The only difference I see over here is the amperage. That one over there on the first amperage draw, I saw 6.5, but on the good one, we're seeing 5.6. So I don't know if that's good enough or if that's definitive enough to make a call about an injector. I don't know. But since these injectors were very easy to get to, so it was easy to swap them. But I mean, I'm gonna save this and maybe read more about this, but based on these waveforms, the waveforms looked pretty identical. Like, based on these waveforms, I can't really make a call with this. Like, I don't really see even the other trace, the green trace, you know, the green trace kind of looks the same, you know, this little dip we see over here in voltage, we saw that in the other injector too. So it's hard for me to make a call by looking at this type of waveform. You know, although there is a 1 amperage difference between the injectors, I mean, maybe that's good enough for an injector to throw a code or not spray the correct amount of fuel in the cylinder. So I don't know, but at least we saw this. There isn't a big difference between the two, but you know, again, this was just for learning purposes. Okay, now I'm gonna get my tools out of the way. I'm gonna get my scope test leads out of the way. Okay, so we are done. I just wanted to see the waveforms and compare them. This is not really definitive to me. So if there's anybody here on the channel who knows more about these TDI injector waveform patterns, please let us know in a comment. But this is not enough evidence for me to make a call, okay? Besides that amperage difference. So now I'm gonna get my fuel injector prepped so we can install the new one. I am going to tape up these wires that are opened off camera. I'm gonna tape up these wires, get the new injector ready, and then I'll bring you guys back up. So since injector number 4 is this one, so what I'm gonna do is I am going to get the injector out of this cylinder and bring it back on cylinder 1, because we know this is one that we have on cylinder 4. So I'm gonna move this back to cylinder 1, and then this bad injector, I'm gonna take it out. I will just show you how I'm gonna install the brand new fuel injector, okay? Because it's basically what we just did earlier. I'm gonna do all of that off camera, and then I'll bring you guys back up so we can install our brand new injector on cylinder number 4, okay? So I will get my scope out of the way, and then I'll bring you guys back up.